family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for your Friday weekend edition of Point of View. I am Penna Dexter. Kirby Anderson is, I'm not sure where, but the three of us, we've got a panel here, get the privilege today of talking to you and with you, and we're so grateful for that. Debbie Georgatos is with me, and she is an attorney. She is a political activist and also the host of America Can We Talk, nationally syndicated radio program, mostly on the Salem Radio Network. And Lathan Watts is also with me, a director of community relations. He is also attorney with First Liberty Institute. We love to talk about religious liberty, and we are going to do a lot of that today, but there's also something that's taken over the news this week, which is the immigration issue and family separation. So there'll be a lot of that. Later in the program, Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council will talk with us about President Trump's executive order on that subject. And also Art Arthur from the Center for Immigration Studies will be joining us. With him, we're going to discuss the legislation that actually was supposed to be voted on this week. What kind of things should Congress do right now about immigration, and what realistically does he think will happen? We'll talk to him about that. Also, this hour, we're going to talk about the Republican convention that took place last weekend in Texas, in San Antonio, Texas, actually. Debbie Georgatos was there, and we're going to discuss a billboard put up by the great First Baptist Church of Dallas advertising, I think it was his 4th of July weekend, one of the weekends. He wanted to, Pastor Jeffress there, wanted to ask and answer the question, is America a Christian nation? This was the tease on the billboard, and boy, this got the Dallas Morning News and the mayor all upset. We'll talk about that also here on Point of View. So we hope you'll stick with us for the entire broadcast. We've got a few other topics to throw in, but first of all, Lathan, let me just go to you first, because First Liberty Institute has got a couple of cases that have had some big developments. We've been saying that you've got, well, I guess it was 6 or 5 cases could be headed to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's been action on 2 of them, hasn't there, recently?
Yes, we'll be filing next week with the United States Supreme Court our petition on behalf of Coach Joe Kennedy, and also on behalf of the Bladensburg World War I Memorial, on behalf of our client, the American Legion.
Wow. So Coach Kennedy, of course, is the coach, and I'm going to give a visual. If you're watching, or if you're actually online listening, you can watch this, because his whole problem with the courts is taking a knee. Is taking a knee. I'm blocking my voice from the mic. From the taking the knee after a football game. He's a coach out in Washington State. He prayed personal prayers out on the field after the game, and this right to do so has been denied him, and he is now, hopefully, the Supreme Court will take this case, Lathan.
We hope so. We'll take the Supreme Court getting involved in order for this outcome to be resolved, because the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his appeal and basically said that any public school employee cannot engage in any sort of religious activity if they can be seen doing so. The dispute really gets down to when Coach Kennedy would go to the 50 after the ball game and take a knee for about 15 to 30 seconds and say a silent prayer, thanking God for the opportunity to coach those kids. And the question was, as presented in the Ninth Circuit and argued in the Ninth Circuit, is when he does that, is he speaking on behalf of the government? Is that action or that speech government speech because he's employed by the school district, or is it his own private free exercise of religion? We, of course, as I think any neutral observer who saw that happen would probably not assume that Coach Kennedy is on the field speaking on behalf of the entire school district, establishing Christianity as the official religion of the Bremerton ISD. The Ninth Circuit saw it the other way and ruled against Coach Kennedy, and really put a lot of employees, government employees in the Ninth Circuit of all faiths, in a very difficult position now, because if you take that precedent that they just established in the Ninth Circuit, unless the Supreme Court takes the case and reverses them, that could be applied to a Catholic teacher in a public school wearing a rosary or a cross around his or her neck, a Jewish employee wearing a yarmulke. Anything that could be seen was basically what the Ninth Circuit said would violate the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. So we're hopeful the court takes that case and reverses the Ninth Circuit, both for Coach Kennedy and for really people of all faith in the Ninth Circuit who happen to work for some entity of the government.
Debbie, what was interesting to me about the case was that no one ever complained about it. It was actually a compliment that brought the case. And so it's almost like, when we're in here with Kelly, sometimes he says prayer is the new pornography. It feels like that.
Yeah. It does. And the description you just gave of the decision by the trial court, the notion that any expression of faith by a public employee, I was just thinking, even if you happen to be someone who brings your lunch to school and you eat in the cafeteria with the kids and you just sit down silently to yourself, say a silent ask blessing before you eat, that seems like it falls under the prohibition that was defined by the trial court. And that notion that you're going to say once you are a public employee, you have no freedom of expression of your religion, I think is really extreme. And I was actually so surprised that the Ninth Circuit didn't want to just modify the trial court or in some way correct it, but they let it stand as it was. So it's a very important case. And I was curious, and I don't know if you have a thought on this, Lathan, but in light of the Supreme Court decision in the Masterpiece Cake Shop, do you have any inkling which way that's going to push the court with respect to this case?
No,
are they too different?
Is the short answer. I have no idea. Predicting the Supreme Court and what cases they're going to take and not take is a dangerous business. The numbers, just the sheer volume of cases that are appealed to them, the numbers work against you. But we're hopeful that this decision, being as bad as it is and as broad as it is, will prompt them to take that case. It's a discussion maybe for a even longer segment as to how Justice Kennedy would view this and his legacy, and is he going to stay on the court, and lots of factors. But I hope that the Masterpiece decision might inform their thinking on whether or not to take Coach Kennedy's case.
And by the way, speaking of the Masterpiece decision, I didn't get a chance to post this because we had a lot of articles to post at pointofview.net, but there were a couple online outlets that posted an article by your client, and we have to talk about it after the break, the Kleins, who also have a bakery for wedding cakes in Oregon, and their case, another one that could go to the Supreme Court, and Kelly Shackelford thinks that it needs to, your boss, and I think a lot of us do, but they wrote this piece, and it was compelling to talk about the similarities and the difference between their case and Masterpiece. And certainly over the years, they bonded with Jack Phillips because they're both basically fighting the same battle. And we're so glad that First Liberty Institute is there fighting for them. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got so much more today. We hope you'll stick with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
What is the American creed? That is a question David Glertner asks in his book, America Light. He has been on my radio program to talk about his book and his op-ed that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. He is a fascinating individual. He received 2 degrees in classical Hebrew literature, but then became a professor of computer science at Yale University. Some have called him a rock star in the world of computing. You might remember that he was one of the people who was critically injured when he opened a mail bomb sent by the Unabomber. He believes that we need to return to the principles that made this country great. Unfortunately, he says many of us don't know what they are or think they can't work. He blames the public schools and the academy for this failure to pass on the basic ideals that have served America so well for centuries. He laments that almost no one believes that our public schools are doing a passable job of teaching American and Western civilization. Textbooks and class lectures in our education system today often start with the assumption that America and Western ideals are bad for civilization. He concludes that many American children have never heard a good word for the United States, the West, Judaism, or Christianity their whole lives. He also laments that our American culture is in the hands of intellectuals, which he says are usually people born with high IQ and low common sense. He gives lots of examples of this. You can probably think of many other examples of people who are very bright but lacking in basic common sense. America's creed is quite simple: freedom, equality, democracy, and America as the promised land. The early founders believed in America as a city on a hill, as did many presidents right up to President Reagan. It is time to use our American creed to evaluate those who are teaching our kids and those who are leading our nation. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts, and Debbie Georgatos in studio with me. It's Friday weekend edition. We're talking religious liberty right now, and let me put up my present that Lathan brought me today again, and this time I'm not going to put it in front of the mic. But this is Coach Kennedy. This is the new T-shirt. Okay, I'm on Team Kennedy. We're all on Team Kennedy if we support his right to pray.
Can you order these at First Liberty?
Those will be available. We're coming to our end of our fiscal year, so we're doing our push for donations, and they are going to be available for donors, and they're going to be available. I don't have the exact date yet because that is almost like a prototype T-shirt. But
wow, I feel so honored.
If people will, if people will stay in touch with us at firstliberty.org, they will definitely have an opportunity to get them.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we were talking before the break, of course, about the Masterpiece case, that ruling. Of course, as we know, that it was ruled based on basically words that were said by the commission, hateful words about Jack Phillips' faith, and that was really the basis for the ruling. And so there's a lot more on religious liberty that still needs to be decided with these many wedding vendor cases that are coming up. And one of those is Melissa and Aaron Klein. And so, you know, I mentioned there's an article floating around by them this week. And Lathan, there are differences. There's a big difference between the Phillips and the Klein case, right?
I would say, as far as the Kleins are concerned, the biggest difference is Jack Phillips still has his business. And the state of Oregon assessed a penalty against the Kleins of $135,000 and bankrupted them. Their business does not exist anymore. And this is a case that I think I've had conversations with friends of mine who aren't even particularly religious, but are more along the libertarian lines, and they are just as fired up about this case as folks who look at it from a religious liberty standpoint, because from their point of view, that here is the government putting someone out of business because they don't like what they believe, and the government put them out of business, and initially even told them they weren't allowed to speak their beliefs on marriage. So it's a case that it is similar to Jack's case in the core issue. I think we had appealed to the Oregon State Supreme Court on behalf of the Kleins, and the Oregon State Supreme Court just this week announced that they would not hear the Kleins' appeal. So now, their only recourse now is going to be the United States Supreme Court. You
have to go up the court system, the federal court system now. So it's still going to be a while.
We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're saying that the highest court, of state court in Oregon, declined their case.
Exactly.
Okay. So did you get
their...
direct appeal to the Supreme Court out of that? Then yeah, that's direct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Possible to directly appeal to the Supreme Court. So you have
It's
two
the highest
lawyers
court
in
of
here with me that can make sure that I
Scary.
Right.
understand these things. Wow, Debbie. So that's, in a sense, exciting. Of course, we have Anthony Kennedy, and you kind of hope that it takes a little bit longer, so perhaps there could be a replacement for him.
That would be just great. In fact, Anthony Kennedy's being discussed frequently as someone who may choose over the summer to retire. And the other one is Justice Ginsburg, who's very senior. And, I don't ever wish ill on anyone, but I think that people, if they're not alert and they're not ready to do the cases, you need to get new people in. And I think there's a lot of hope, certainly on the conservative side, that you can have during President Trump's term, have the opportunity for him to nominate one or more additional federal court judges in addition to Judge Gorsuch, who is, from conservative point of view, just a great add to the Supreme Court. And to be precise, judges aren't supposed to be political. So when I say that it was a good appointment, a conservative appointment, it's because he's someone who says, I will apply the Constitution. I will not make law. I will not create policy from the bench. And that's a lot of what people have been very concerned about the Supreme Court in this direction. In many cases, from the marriage decision, even going back to Roe versus Wade, it was legislating from the Supreme Court. So the idea of a conservative justice means you actually apply what the Constitution says. And that's what Justice Gorsuch does.
Yeah, so we're not talking political conservatism. We're talking you have a conservative way of being a judge.
Correct.
You're not going to go too far and overstep your bounds.
And Gorsuch, I've heard him speak publicly and refer to himself as an unashamed textualist.
Okay, I love that word, textualist. Exactly. That's a great word.
And that he is proof that a textualist can be confirmed because he's now on the United States Supreme Court.
Yeah, and obviously the other big thing is if we did have one of these justices retire, any nomination to the Supreme Court has to go through the U.S. Senate. Right now, the Republicans have a bare majority in the Senate, and it's actually expected after the 2018 midterms, Republicans will hold on to the Senate and maybe even gain a few seats, have a little more stable ability to get a nomination through. But anyway, it would be great if we were able to put more textualists or constitutionalists on the Supreme Court during President Trump's first term.
All right, one more case that has had some action this week. This is the Bladensburg Cross, and this is a huge cross in Maryland. Put up by moms of World War I veterans. This is another case in which you already had a cross case that was long-standing, and it was First Liberty's case, the Mojave Desert Cross. And just being me, I thought that would have settled it, but it didn't, did it?
Unfortunately, no. The Bladensburg World War I Memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., was originally put up by Gold Star Moms to honor 49 men of Prince George's County, Maryland, who did not return from World War I. It stood there for nearly 100 years until the American Humanist Association were offended by it and filed a lawsuit. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that it violates the Establishment Clause because the monument is in the shape of a cross and it now sits on government property. That was the crux of the argument. But two key facts to consider are, number one, the mothers chose that shape for the monument specifically because it resembled the actual gravestones that many of their sons were buried under in Europe. And at the time, those mothers would not have been able to visit their son's actual gravestone. And we have letters from some of the mothers. One particular Miss Martha Redmond, whose son William is honored by that monument, who wrote to her senator, and I'm paraphrasing, but she basically told her senator, part of the reason this is so important to me is that I consider this monument to be my son's gravestone. So it's in the shape of a cross for a reason. Now, too, it does sit on government property now, but that originally was property owned by the American Legion, who is First Liberty's client. The only reason it is government property now is because the government, via eminent domain, took the property when they were constructing a highway. The highway itself is the Veterans Memorial Highway. And even
Ironic.
exactly. And even when they were constructing the highway, they literally went out of their way not to disturb this monument. I mean, if you go to this monument right now, you will see the roads curve around it, and it sits almost in the median. So it was originally property owned by the American Legion. The shape was chosen to resemble the headstones of these men. And the Fourth Circuit still thinks that violates the Establishment Clause. In fact, during an oral argument, one of the judges on the three-judge panel suggested, well, if we just cut the arms off the cross, then maybe that
It would be constitutional
then
then.
it wouldn't be so offensive and could pass constitutional muster. Now, the dangerous thing about this case, and the reason we've appealed to the Supreme Court, hopefully they will take it and reverse the Fourth Circuit, is that just over the river from Bladensburg, Maryland, is Arlington National Cemetery. And if the Fourth Circuit isn't reversed, and this becomes the precedent, the Fourth Circuit, the American Humanist Association or whoever can take that decision, go over to Arlington and go to the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice, the Argonne Cross, even the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and say, well, sandblast God off of that Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and that cross-shaped memorial has to come down as well.
Wow.
I actually cannot believe that possibility that the case would be applied to the Arlington National Cemetery did not occur to the lower court. I mean, I don't know if it was argued at the time of the decision, but the notion that you're going to have a cross ruled unconstitutional on public land and you're anywhere in the vicinity of Washington, D.C., frankly, anywhere in America, many people have either seen on television Arlington National Cemetery or actually visited it. It's astonishing. It did not occur to them, what are we saying, and how's this going to apply at Arlington? The other thing I've said, and I'll be really quick, I've got a zip here, but I do think it's really troublesome or problematic that to make a court come around to see this as being acceptable on public land, you have to argue something about historicity, like somehow the historic or nature of this, or this isn't, or you have to argue on, instead of urging a court to make the central ruling that the First Amendment's prohibition on respecting establishment of religion is not violated by a religious symbol on public land. That does not seem extreme to me, but that is almost too hard to argue.
It would be nice if you could argue it and set that in stone, though.
Correct. We would love to set that in stone, but our top priority is making sure that monument stays right where it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up, we're going to talk about some of the, I guess maybe there was a little bit of fireworks at the Texas State Convention. Debbie Georgatos will tell us about it after this.
Nancy was uncomfortable, to say the least. As an introvert, she didn't like controversy. But when she learned that parents were prohibited from seeing the contents of a major standardized test, she knew her responsibilities as a parent needed to outweigh her discomfort. Her daughter turned out to be the only student in her district to opt out of the test, and one of just a handful in the entire state of Texas. But she stood her ground, and the next year, Point of View helped her unite with other parents to make a difference for their children. The world loves to force us into its mold and to mock believers when we resist. Your gift to Point of View is an investment in courage and changed lives. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. Be part of amazing transformations. It all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking in to pointofview.net. One day, you were going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute and Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk. And this last weekend was the Texas State Republican Convention. And, you know, state politics is a lot of fun. And really, I don't know, in a sense, it's an opportunity for people to get involved. If you're going to complain about something, you can actually do something about it. And we could talk, and we will maybe on a future program talk about how you get involved in the state of Texas during this hour. I mean, we have a lot of Texas listeners, a lot of people in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and there's a way, and it's not that hard, to be a delegate. And Debbie, you were a delegate last weekend at the Republican convention. You've been active for a long time. So, you know, Texas is a red state, but everybody's not as red as everybody else. You've got battles going on. So just tell us about it.
You know, first, I love, Penna, that you mentioned to all of our listeners that anyone can get involved in party politics. I don't know exactly how the Democrats organize it, but on the Republican side, it just really takes contacting your county party chairman and just asking, how do I get involved? I want to be involved at some level. And I'm not going to go into the detail, but many things you can do. But in San Antonio,
maybe we'll do a little workshop here on Point of View in the future about that.
That's a great idea. And yeah, I can imagine if you've never been involved, it seems like something maybe you think you have to be, you know, chosen or elected. It's not like that at all. It's people who are activists. But with our convention this past weekend, the two big issues were there is always a platform discussion and the platform of the Republican Party. Ultimately, there's one platform of the Republican Party that comes out of the national level, but every state creates their own. So we have the Texas GOP platform, and every state has theirs, and then they all get to Washington, and then up in Washington, the national level creates a final Republican Party platform, and this happens every 2 years. So we had the platform, many planks of controversy that were discussed and debated and voted on, and the other big issue was an election for the state party chairman. And every state has a Republican and I assume a Democrat chair of their party, and so at the state level. And so we have an incumbent state chair named James Dickey, and we had a person challenge him to try to. She wanted to become the state chair. So that was not as the personalities and names are not as interesting as the underlying kind of the tug of war with inside the Republican Party, which I took away from the convention, had the feel of it is the idea of kind of more a grassroots feel. You want grassroots people who are involved, certainly in knocking on doors and helping candidates, but who are also encouraged and supported to run if they choose to challenge an incumbent, and grassroots involvement in substance and policy that we try to hold elected officials accountable. You know, we say we're pro-life. Why did you vote for this? So it's an activist, it's a kind of an engaged activist feel. I'm describing that as the kind of conservative grassroots side. Then there's a more traditional establishment side of the party.
Let me just jump in because, you know, when you get involved, and I've been involved in Texas party politics, you don't do it because you want to be a Republican or you want to be a political person. You do it because you care about issues.
Right. You hone in on issues.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so anyway, that was kind of an underlying theme. Was the establishment side, I would say, is kind of more, wanting to perpetuate the current incumbents, trying to keep the grassroots kind of active and knocking on doors and putting signs in yards, but not really involved in the substance and creation of the party's agenda, which is where the platform comes in. The platform is lengthy, and it addresses pretty much every issue that people are concerned about. So you mentioned, Penna, that people get involved in the party because of issues. There was one woman there who was just entirely, her purpose in going was to make the argument that there should be vaccine choice, meaning parents should be able to legally say their children should not have to get vaccines if they don't want them to, and versus the state mandating it or the state saying if you don't get your child vaccinated, they cannot attend public school. That was a very controversial issue. I think the platform, I'm sure it did, it came out on the side of saying parents can decide and should not be punished by the state, should not make vaccine decisions. That was a big one. There was a big discussion about a new provision related to marijuana possession. There's a push for marijuana legalization nationally. There is an argument among some people that at least to legalize marijuana for with respect to for medicinal use for certain particular problems. Many people think that's just a backdoor to legalizing it, but there was a provision in the made it through the platform. This committee is endless busyness, but this committee creates a platform, and then everyone can show up and take a number and weigh in, and then the entire convention votes on it. But the provision was about marijuana, and it was if you were arrested with 3 ounces or less, I think it was, that you would just get off basically with $100 fine, no jail time, and it was a misdemeanor. Well, you can get speeding tickets, not that I would know personally, but you can get speeding tickets for more than $100. I mean, that's a pretty minor offense, and I guess 3 ounces, or maybe it's even 1 ounce, whatever it was, it's something like 30 large joints and 60 skinny ones or something. It's not a minor amount. It could be an amount you would have in your possession to sell, and was looked as a backdoor. I'm pretty sure that one finally got eliminated. I couldn't find it before I came here today. That discussion. Oh, there was a big one. Speaking of religious freedom, as we were earlier today, there was a great affirmation of religious freedom in public schools. We urge school administrators and officials not to infringe on Texas school students and staff's First Amendment rights to pray and engage in religious speech individually or in groups. It goes on and on. But
so, were you happy with the platform as a whole, that as it came out of the convention?
So far as I know, part of what happened, yes. Overall, I'm very happy with it. I'm in the minority of people who thinks it'd be nice to shorten it. It's a little long, but, many conservatives want to make sure it's our one chance to say we're spelling all we think, and we're going to get it all in there.
And nobody will read it because it's too long.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad the plank about religious liberty is in there. People may remember, especially in the Dallas audience, our representation of the Kuntz High School cheerleaders who wanted to speak positive messages on the run-through banners for the football team, including scripture. We are still, unbelievably, litigating that case, and we're going to be back in front of the Texas Supreme Court soon again, because the school district just refuses to let this go. I mean, they have been defeated multiple times, and I mean, our original clients, some of them have, I think one of them's married now. I mean, that's how long this has been going on.
Those cheerleaders are no longer cheerleaders.
Right, but the school district just won't let it go. And I don't know how many times we have to beat them before they get it into their heads that this speech belongs to these students. They are not speaking on behalf of the school district. It goes back to the argument we discussed in Coach Kennedy's case as well. Just because they're out there doesn't mean that they are speaking on behalf of the school district. They bought the paint for those banners, the paper. It's their idea. They did it. That speech belongs to them, and they have a right to the free exercise of their religion and their speech. And the Supreme Court has ruled students and teachers don't lose they don't shed their constitutional rights when they walk through the gates of the schoolhouse. Ironically enough, it was a case brought by the ACLU that resulted in that quote that we use quite often.
Very interesting.
I love that. And actually it ties into something we were just talking about this GOP convention, but just the idea that if you're really passionate about religious freedom or, marijuana legalization or keeping it illegal or what marriage should be or privacy rights, this is a great way. It's actually learn things. I went to try to speak at the platform committee to suggest I was arguing in favor of removing the legalization or removing the diminishment of punishment for having an ounce of pot. I think it's a pathway to legalizing drugs. And I ran to the woman who was there advocating for vaccine choice. And she said, well, that sounds like, I don't want government controlling. I don't want them controlling vaccines or marijuana. And so I said, well,
it's more of a libertarian.
Yeah, but it was a really good chance to talk through the distinctions of those two issues. I mean, vaccines are there, promoted by doctors and, frankly, pharmaceutical companies to urge people to get them. And there are public safety aspects to that issue. But marijuana legalization is about public safety overall. It's about the role of government in, if you think marijuana is okay, legalize, then why wouldn't we say heroin? Why wouldn't we just legalize all drugs? And maybe some people would say that, but you really get to kind of bounce ideas off each other. It's very healthy.
Yeah, well, the drug issue is going to be a big one because there are many principled conservatives, I believe, who are for drug legalization. They see it as a way to stop the border wars and, just pull the rug out from under the cartels and things like that. But I just have too many friends in Colorado that have talked about the increase in car accidents. And, I mean, do you really want a bunch of people running around high all over the state? I think that is it's a tool of the left. I mean, if you really want to get down to the bottom of it, to, weaken us in a sense. Ladies and gentlemen, there's so much to discuss with regard to state politics, but we're going to move on to another religious liberty issue, free speech issue, right after this. This month is the third anniversary of the 2015 Supreme Court decision, Obergefell versus Hodges. The decision brought us same-sex marriage across the land because it struck down all state laws that specified that marriage is the union between one man and one woman. When a court hands down a sweeping ruling that changes something you have known to be true about the world, it's well worth studying the dissenting opinion. Chief Justice Roberts, for the first time in his tenure, read his from the bench. He said, in part, "If you are among the many Americans of whatever sexual orientation who favor expanding same-sex marriage, by all means celebrate today's decision. Celebrate the achievement of a desired goal. Celebrate the opportunity for a new expression of commitment to a partner. Celebrate the availability of new benefits, but do not celebrate the Constitution. It had nothing to do with it." Some people said the ruling was a bellwether. It showed us where we are as a nation. It's true that some states had already opened marriage to same-sex couples. However, most had not. In fact, they'd amended their constitutions to say that marriage is what it has been for millennia. The Supreme Court ruling changed that, and in doing so, it changed what we can now count on as being true. I interviewed Justice Glenn Murdoch, recently retired from the Alabama Supreme Court. He says that post-Obergefell, we have entered what is really a new cosmology. The Supreme Court, he says, has recognized this new individual truth and dignity-based set of rights, not grounded in the integrated biblical paradigm of objective truth and rights understood by our framers. The marriage decision did include language about the right to live according to the man-woman definition of marriage. All 9 justices affirmed that religious liberty should be protected. Will it? With this post-Obergefell orthodoxy, we still don't know. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View at your roundtable. Debbie Georgatos, Lathan Watts, and I'm Penna Dexter. Debbie was at the Texas Republican Convention last weekend. Debbie, one issue I forgot to ask you about, I can't believe I forgot. But, of course, the privacy law was never actually voted on by the legislature last time. And it had to do with protecting privacy in things like restrooms, locker rooms, from people who think they're a different gender than they were really born. And that didn't get voted on because of a lot of political dynamics that we won't discuss. But what happened with that in the platform?
Yeah, I did actually. The the thing that passed reads, gender identity. We urge the enactment of legislation addressing individuals' use of bathrooms, showers, and locker rooms that correspond with their biologically determined sex. So
Right.
they did put it in there. And they also, the other quick thing, I know we're going to go on to the next topic, but I mentioned on the break that they managed to vote down or avoid including a plank that would have supported Texas putting on a ballot in the fall for Texas to secede from the Union.
They try
secede
that
from
every
America.
time.
Yeah, that did not get in there.
Lathan, with these SOGI efforts, how do you do a legislative response that doesn't get attacked then as being an attack on a certain group of people?
I'm not the world's foremost expert, but if it was up to me, I think actually there was a bill last session that I want to say my good friend Ron Simmons had in the House that addressed it by simply stating only the state can create a protected class of people. And that's specific legal language once you get into protected classes. But that, I think, is probably the most efficient way if the state is going to take action, is just to say if there's going to be any new measures that are going to create a new protected class of people in the state of Texas, it will be done by the legislature of Texas, not by this city in North Texas and this city in West Texas having one. This school district here has it, and to the point where you have this hodgepodge of laws and policies where you don't know, depending on which town you're in, what the policy is. I think that is more a function for the state legislature, and I think that type of bill may stand a better chance of getting through the legislature.
Okay, very interesting. Hope some legislators are listening. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we posted at pointofview.net Todd Starnes' article about this story. It's an amazing story. We've got a big church here in Dallas. Their pastor is Robert Jeffress. He's a frequent guest on Point of View, and he's also on President Trump's Faith Committee, advises the president. First Baptist is this weekend. Robert Jeffress will deliver his message on America is a Christian nation, or is America a Christian nation. They advertised with billboards. A couple of billboards were put up. I guess there was a complaint about it to the billboard company. And the Dallas Morning News got hold of it. The mayor of Dallas, Mike Rawlings, got a hold of it. And the mayor told the Dallas Morning News, about the idea of America being a Christian nation, I guess, that this is not the Christ I follow. It is not the Dallas I want to be, to say things that do not unite us but divide us. I never heard those words, that voice come out of Christ, just the opposite. I mean, be proud of yours, but do not diminish mine. In other words, to give that message of Christianity or America having Christian roots is not the Dallas that our mayor wants to be. I just hate to tell him about the mega churches we've got and the Christians we've got in the Metroplex. But the upshot of this was the billboard company took the billboards down. They didn't want the controversy. I think they were based in New York. But Clear Channel went out and sold or gave, I don't know, the church 20 billboards across the Metroplex. So it turned out great for the promotion of this weekend's service. But the idea that, I don't know who wants to talk first, but the idea that the mayor of Dallas would say this, I can't believe it. Does he want to be reelected?
Yeah, I think he's term limited, thank goodness. I think he can't run again. But I was going to say, on this topic, I think that this is really evidence of things, a point we've made numerous times on the show, which is culture gets shaped by who speaks up. And the LGBT activists in this country have made the notion, it's not just LGBT. I know this is about Christian America, a Christian nation, but the left-wing activists and the LGBT issue and many other issues have made Christianity the bad guy, or something that you're not proud to assert, or that you should recognize only belongs in a little, discussion in your private home or your small little church, but it doesn't belong in the public eye. And I think that's part of, it's decades of pummeling by the American left, pushing Christianity out of public life and public eye and public discussion, and the notion that it's easier for Mayor Rawlings to weigh in and say, that's not very inclusive, that's not very nice. That's what he's saying, because it's easier to say that than to say what's wrong with the notion of having said that. And so I think it's just a measure of society, which means people who do understand the Judeo-Christian roots of our nation should speak up more. And my other quick point on it is this. It is important to try to help people understand what it means to say America is a Christian nation, because the argument the left is presenting is, and therefore you hate everybody else. Therefore everyone else isn't welcome, isn't included. When the truth is that the Judeo-Christian roots of America caused our society to be so welcoming, accepting of many different people, to have many religions born in America, created in America, honored in America, permitted here. The Judeo-Christian roots does not mean we are exclusionary. In fact, Judeo-Christian ideas have made the safest place for freedom of religion and speech on the planet.
Lathan?
I think this is also an example of the marketplace of ideas, and when it is allowed to work, that it does. This is a private company that owns these billboards who made a decision based on feedback that they received. They're totally within their rights to do so. They took them down. Another private company made the exact opposite decision based on maybe feedback that they received. And that's how it's supposed to work. The antidote to speech that you don't like is more speech. It is not to try to silence the speech that you don't like or that hurts your feelings or that you don't feel is inclusive. The response to that should be to increased speech in the marketplace of ideas and let the ideas compete. And here you have both the marketplace of ideas and the actual economic marketplace working the way it's supposed to.
In one sense, but in another sense, the mayor's comments. What about that? I guess he can say what he wants to. He can also say what he wants, but it's just in a sense it's not wise.
He absolutely can, and there are, the freedom of speech, just like any freedom, comes with responsibility, and there are also consequences to our actions and our speech. And a lot of people want to talk about free speech when they say something and it winds them up in trouble. And they say, well, but I have a right to say this. Well, yes, you do, but that right does not include an absence of any consequences from when you say that. And, Debbie said this mayor is term limited, but if he were not, the consequences of this speech might have affected him at the ballot box, and so be it.
Also, there's this we've talked about in the show before, the Founder's Bible, which is a Bible that lays out, it exposes the roots within the thinking of the founding of America, that America's ideas and the thinkers at the time who created our country were not secularists. They were not atheists. They were not proudly, staunchly trying to divide, government and religion. Their ideas were formed by the God of the Bible, the ideas of the God of the Bible. And to say that as a healthy thing about America is a good thing to have people understand. We can't get battered down and not expose what that means about America's identity.
If you want to learn more about this particular controversy, this occurrence this week in the Metroplex, you can go to pointofview.net and see Todd Starnes. He's always got a little bit tongue-in-cheek and a lot of fun. He's got a piece up there and a whole lot more. Well, next up, we're going to talk about something that happened, probably a good development with regard to the U.S. and the UN. We'll be back.
Ronnie fixes cars in a shop on his property. That allows him to earn a living for his family and be home to help care for Michael. Ronnie and Judy adopted Michael more than 20 years ago, knowing he would never walk or be able to care for himself. But through listening to Point of View, they were convicted that every life God gives is precious. So even though Ronnie is now 69 and Judy can't lift Michael anymore, every day is a labor of love and a testimony to their faith. Providing for their family isn't easy, and yet every month for almost 15 years, they've invested in Point of View. Some listeners have changed their communities and the nation. Ronnie and Judy changed everything for Michael. Your gift to Point of View in June is an investment in changed lives, and a matching challenge provides double the impact if you give in the next few days. Please give now, 1-800-347-5151, or visit pointofview.net. Make a difference for the future. That future is now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us for Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, and Debbie Georgatos is in studio with me. Debbie is a political activist and also a radio host. She hosts her own program, America Can We Talk? Debbie, thanks for being in here.
Thanks for having me. Fun to be here.
Also, Lathan Watts, who is Director of Community Relations and Attorney for First Liberty Institute. Hi, Lathan.
That's all right. It's good to be back.
We've got, I think this hour is being taken over by the news in one sense, because the week was taken over by pictures and images of family separation at the border. So that will be part of our topic today. But we're also going to be joined by an expert on immigration, Art Arthur from the Center for Immigration Studies, to talk about the actual legislation that needs to or doesn't need to be passed. He will join us. Also, Tony Perkins from Family Research Council will join us to sort of explain President Trump's executive order this week to try to stem the optical damage that was taking place at the border. But first, I want to sort of cover a piece of news that took place that's gratifying to many of us who have been UN watchers for many years. The United States made this decision to pull out of the Human Rights Council. And here's a clip on that withdrawal from U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley.
For too long, the Human Rights Council has been a protector of human rights abusers and a cesspool of political bias. Regrettably, it is now clear that our call for reform was not heeded. Human rights abusers continue to serve on and be elected to the Council. The world's most inhumane regimes continue to escape scrutiny, and the Council continues politicizing and scapegoating of countries with positive human rights records in an attempt to distract from the abusers in their ranks. Therefore, as we said we would do a year ago, if we did not see any progress, the United States is officially withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council.
However, says Ambassador Haley, who was actually speaking in Switzerland, she says that the U.S. is not getting out of the business of protecting human rights.
This step is not a retreat from human rights commitments. On the contrary, we take this step because our commitment does not allow us to remain a part of a hypocritical and self-serving organization that makes a mockery of human rights.
The Human Rights Council used to be called the Human Rights Commission. The United States has threatened to leave it before because of the human rights abusers that really had control of it in many cases. I don't remember the dynamics of changing it to a council rather than a commission. But the bottom line is, Debbie, is that we're in the company of some countries who, I mean, how could they talk about human rights when their human rights records are just disastrous?
It is almost farcical. I just quickly counted. There are 47 countries that are members of the UN Human Rights Council, and among those is Venezuela, whose government's openly firing on protesting crowds. I mean, this is actually a great article about a year ago in June of last year that Nikki Haley wrote, where she talked about the president of Venezuela, whose government shoots protesters in the street, recently thanked the international community for its universal vote of confidence in that country's commitment to human rights. I mean, just absurdity. Same with Cuba. She had another similar quote about Cuba and the atrocities against human rights in Cuba, and yet Cuba was touting and thanking the international community for supporting their demonstration of human rights. I mean, at some point, it's just, it's laughable, but it's irresponsible for America to remain part of this Human Rights Council and legitimize what they're doing, which is obviously not cracking down on and calling out human rights abusers. Now, there's a whole other aspect of it relates to Israel, too, but I don't know if you...
Yeah, well, Lathan, let me just ask you, because, sometimes this is a long time coming, and it's, in a sense, taken this president and his administration to do some of these things that some of us feel like should have been done a long time ago.
He seems to take pride in doing that and letting you know that other people have said they were going to do this and they didn't, and I'm here and I'm getting it done. I think I agree with this decision, just as Debbie said. I mean, this Human Rights Council, Commission, whichever you want to call it, has become a farce, like many things, frankly, that go on in the UN. When you have, it has become the place where human rights abusers go to sort of polish up their human rights credentials and say, well, I'm on this commission, so I'm obviously, great on human rights. Pay no attention to the dead bodies in the streets in my capital. I'm on the Human Rights Commission. And then have the audacity to shake their fist at the U.S. over things that happen here. So I think this, as you said, it's been a long time coming, and as well as some other things that previous administrations maybe had mentioned, but either never got around to or just didn't summon the political will to do so. This president did, and I think it's the right decision. I don't agree with everything that he says or does, but when he's right, he's right, and I think he got this one right.
And if there were, even if there were just this other reason to leave the council, which is our best friend in the Middle East, Israel gets horrible treatment at the hands of the UN and especially this council.
Absolutely. It's amazing how often Israel is condemned by the UN broadly, by the Security Council, and by this particular council within the UN. There was a little bit of data about it just saying that the council adopted 169 condemnatory resolutions on countries as of the end of May of this year. Of those, nearly half focus on Israel. Israel being the victim of Palestinian lobbing rockets in, attacking them day and night. Palestinians don't get condemned, but Israel does, pretty much because they're defending themselves. And this is a theme that's carried out throughout the UN in large part because of the OIC within the UN, the Organization of Islamic Countries, that tend to set the agenda for the UN and tell them how they should look at Israel.
I think the question is now, the United Nations wants the United States on this council to do just what Lathan just mentioned, give it legitimacy. Now that we're gone, does anybody have any thoughts about what the UN might do about it?
Well, that's a really good question. Maybe America should just propose a new commission. Just push that one aside, let it dangle in the wind, and America can say within the UN, we'd like to propose the creation of a new commission genuinely dedicated to human rights. I think we need to take the lead. I don't think the UN is going to respond in a way substantively to what we're saying and change their ways. So we should just make the new commission.
Either that or have our own State Department just issue statements on human rights violations, which they do. But for them to be, to announce we're not going to be a part of this because it's absurd. We are going to, however, continue to speak on human rights abuses, and we will call them as we see them as the United States of America. UN, if you want to play along, that's great. But we know human rights abuses when we see them, and we will continue to call balls and strikes as we see them.
The UN actually should exist and should have as part of its mandate, and does, the protection of human rights across the world. If it doesn't do that, perhaps it's way less relevant than we give it. Well, next up, we are going to sort of dissect the immigration issue, and we'll do that with a couple of guests, so stay with us for more Point of View.
– 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1. – 1
What is the American creed? That is a question David Gellertner asks in his book, America Light. He has been on my radio program to talk about his book and his op-ed that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. He is a fascinating individual. He received 2 degrees in classical Hebrew literature, but then became a professor of computer science at Yale University. Some have called him a rock star in the world of computing. You might remember that he was one of the people who was critically injured when he opened a mail bomb sent by the Unabomber. He believes that we need to return to the principles that made this country great. Unfortunately, he says, many of us don't know what they are or think they can't work. He blames the public schools and the academy for this failure to pass on the basic ideals that have served America so well for centuries. He laments that almost no one believes that our public schools are doing a passable job of teaching American and Western civilization. Textbooks and class lectures in our education system today often start with the assumption that America and Western ideals are bad for civilization. He concludes that many American children have never heard a good word for the United States, the West, Judaism, or Christianity their whole lives. He also laments that our American culture is in the hands of intellectuals, which he says are usually people born with high IQ and low common sense. He gives lots of examples of this. You can probably think of many other examples of people who are very bright but lacking in basic common sense. America's creed is quite simple: freedom, equality, democracy, and America as the promised land. The early founders believed in America as a city on a hill, as did many presidents right up to President Reagan. It is time to use our American creed to evaluate those who are teaching our kids and those who are leading our nation. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I would say that immigration has been the issue of the week in the news, and certainly has focused on the border and separation of children from parents, and we're going to discuss that. But first of all, I want to come to what was supposed to happen this week, which was there's supposed to be a vote on a couple of bills, 2 sort of alternatives in the House of Representatives. I think there was a vote on one of them, but not the second one. So the issue's been postponed ostensibly to next week. And with us to discuss this is Andrew Arthur. Actually, he's called Art. He's resident fellow in law and policy for the Center for Immigration Studies, which is a Washington, D.C. research institute. And we go to them often to sort of get the facts and the research. He's worked a lot in this issue in government, including being an immigration judge at the York Immigration Court in York, Pennsylvania, and advised Congress, and now is at the Center for Immigration Studies. And Art, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, we're glad to have you. And first of all, I know that there are a couple of bills. One was a Paul Ryan, and the other was Congressman Goodlatte's version that were supposed to be voted on. Can you just kind of give us a brief summary of both of those?
I certainly can. And the interesting thing is that at least on paper, Bob Goodlatte is the sponsor of both of them, interestingly enough. But we'll refer to one as the Goodlatte bill, which is technically called the Securing America's Future Act, or SAFA, and the other is the Compromise bill. SAFA would have provided relief for the 690,000 DACA recipients by giving them 3-year renewable visas, non-immigrant visas, that would allow them to work and travel back home if they wanted, but it would not give them a pathway to citizenship. The compromise bill, on the other hand, would actually give a path to citizenship. It would require that individuals be in the United States for 6 years. It would give them a temporary status for 6 years, and at the end of that 6-year period, they could then apply for permanent residence that would put them on a pathway to citizenship. So that was a true amnesty as we generally think about it.
Was that the Ryan-backed bill?
That's the Ryan bill. It also would have applied to a lot larger population of individuals, not just the 690,000 aliens who currently have DACA, but about 1.8 million total, including about 75,000 children of foreign workers here on temporary visas, something that actually hadn't even been conceived of in the president's framework or any of the other discussions that had taken place. So that's the DACA portion of it. With respect to legal immigration, the Goodlatte bill would have ended chain migration. If you remember, President Trump had 4 pillars for any DACA legislation that he wanted, some sort of status for DACA, ending chain migration, ending the diversity lottery, and also border security. So the Goodlatte bill would have actually done what the president asked for, would have ended chain migration, and it would have eliminated green card categories for all aliens other than the spouses and minor children of United States citizens and lawful permanent residents. Both of the bills would have eliminated the diversity visa lottery. That's the lottery that allows 50,000 people, most of whom have no connections to the United States whatsoever and only very limited skills, to apply to a State Department-run lottery to come to the United States, get a green card, and make their way to citizenship. This is one of the odder programs, but it was a diversity visa applicant who ran down and killed 8 people on a bike path in New York City on Halloween of 2017. And he's just one of the bad actors who's been involved in that program. But both of them would have done away with that.
Well, Art, let me ask you, one of the worst words you can apply to bills that reform immigration is the word amnesty. Does that apply to either of these bills?
Yes, the Ryan bill plainly is an amnesty because it would provide a pathway to citizenship for individuals who are legally present in the United States.
Hi, this is Debbie Georgatos. Weren't there people even characterizing the Goodlatte bill with respect to the DACA provision you just described? Weren't there people calling that amnesty and too generous?
Well, if you want to use broad terms, it does give a lawful status to individuals who are here unlawfully. So if you wanted to talk about an amnesty, and there is no set definition, but I've been doing this for a quarter century, and generally I differentiate between a provision that would give a person here illegally permanent status on a path to citizenship, but exclude other things that will give temporary status. So DACA, as it's written, quite frankly, I don't believe that it was legally done, but that would not constitute an amnesty under my definition. It would just constitute a bad idea that was contrary to law.
Hi, Art. This is Lathan Watts. I think you identified a great challenge in any debate or discussion over immigration, and that is at least the political definition of amnesty seems to be anything related to immigration that I don't like.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, that really does seem to be the way that it goes, and you'll hear people say, well, this is an amnesty or this isn't an amnesty. That becomes an issue of semantics, which is why I use as a rule of thumb, and quite frankly, this is the way that that amnesties, especially the '86 amnesty, which is the way that people primarily think of it, as an amnesty, and that is that it will give you a green card or put you on a path to a green card, which will put you on a path to citizenship, because once you get a green card, you're here permanently.
And I think also, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Tim, if I'm off base. I think part of the problem is when discussing ways to reform immigration, we seem to come at it, people on both sides seem to come at it from, at the very beginning, different starting points. And if the starting point for the conversation is what is best for the immigrant, the answer will always be the same. No matter, you can jump through 100 hoops, the answer will always be the same: let them stay, because this is the greatest country in the world, and they're obviously going to be better off if they're allowed to stay here, versus starting the conversation with what is best for the country, and that would apply to America or any country's immigration laws. If you start the discussion from that question, there are a myriad of possible outcomes. But if you start with the question of what is best for the immigrant, the answer will always end up the same.
I'll tell you, I'll just chime quickly to say Trump has made it okay to talk about let's shape immigration policy around what's good for America.
Absolutely. And, I go back to Barbara Jordan. If you remember Congresswoman Jordan, she was the first African-American elected to the United States Congress from the South, and she was the head of the Commission on Immigration Reform back before her untimely death about 20 years ago. And Ms. Jordan said something, Congresswoman Jordan said something that was very important, and that was that in order for immigration to be popular with the American people, it has to be effective, and it has to serve the national interest. Anything that doesn't serve the national interest is going to reduce the faith, the support of the American people for immigration itself. So the point made earlier was a good one. If the question is what serves the individual alien, it's always going to be some sort of amnesty that allows them to remain here. If you're talking about immigration generally, though, we want to have a program that is popular, that is supported by the American people, that helps to grow the American economy. We want to bring people to the United States, and the president has talked about this rightly, and he's actually changed the entire conversation on this. We want to bring in people who have the skills and abilities to succeed in this country. We want immigrants to be successful, and we want immigration to serve the national interest. We want people who are going to grow our economy, not take from it. We want people who are going to contribute to our culture and who will embrace our institutions, not individuals who are going to maintain their own culture or that are going to run down our institutions. And that's pretty critical because that's what the American people want. They want a system that works for America. I know the story of my immigrant ancestors. I trust each of you do too. And, we hold these stories warmly in our hearts because these were individuals who are successful. We look at our own success and we see that being the result of the seeds that they planted. And we want future flows of immigrants to be the same way. And that's important to keep in mind. But when you focus, as you said before, on the individual immigrant, you're always going to come up with the same answer. And that may not be the answer that ends up being best for immigration generally or for the American people as a whole.
Art, that being said, next week there's supposed to be a vote, but this is something I only have just about 30 seconds, but if you can give a quick answer, why haven't we actually reformed immigration sufficiently? That being said, that, most people want something that's good for the country. It's just that we can't agree what's good.
Well, I think that the biggest issue is that there are strong forces at work that don't necessarily have the same interest at heart. Big business wants to have cheap labor, and quite frankly, the Democrats want to have future voters, which is why it's been very difficult to reach a consensus. But you mentioned before I worked for Congress. I worked for Congress and got several bills passed in a bipartisan manner. It's possible.
Art, thank you so much for weighing in and bringing your expertise to the microphone here. We appreciate it.
The pleasure's been mine.
Next up, Tony Perkins. What is President Trump's executive order all about? We'll talk about it after this.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress. But thankfully, Don Blythe had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
It's your Friday weekend edition of Point of View. Around the round table today, Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute and also Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk? And we're talking immigration. Of course, who could miss the images this week of children being separated from their parents? And, of course, a lot of us have concluded that the point on the part of the left in sort of amplifying this is to end the zero tolerance policy, which President Trump will not do. But he did take an action. He issued an executive order And with us to talk about that today is Tony Perkins. He is president of the Family Research Council. Tony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Penna, great to be with you on this Friday afternoon.
Well, it's good to have you, and I'm glad that I have you to weigh in on this because, I think the way you look at the immigration issue, there's an element of compassion in there, but right now we have to talk about, in some senses, what complies with the rule of law and what is good for the nation as a whole. So can you just kind of talk about what the president did with this executive order?
Certainly. And I think, it's important to understand, and I think most Christians and evangelicals, and in fact, the vast majority of America, looking at the polling that's coming out in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, show that we can uphold the rule of law and be compassionate at the same time. Compassion and law and order are not incompatible. In fact, the two are the cornerstone of any civil society. I mean, it is justice and it is mercy. And what the president did, I think, is actually struck that balance, which evangelicals appealed to him to do. On Monday, I met with the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, along with some other evangelical pastors that I brought to talk to him. And they clearly support the rule of law and that we cannot have justice without the rule of law. But at the same time, how do we address this issue of children being separated from their parents? And of course, there's several factors to keep in mind. Number one, one of the factors is the instability, the violence in Central America that is driving many people to leave. Two is that our lax enforcement of the law has been a magnet for people to try to cross the border. And three, when we're talking about families, you cannot ignore the responsibility that these parents have by putting their children at risk by crossing the border and taking the risk of being separated. So considering those three factors, I think the Trump administration has struck the right balance. They're going to continue to enforce the law, unlike what the Obama administration did, and they're going to try and keep families together. Now, here's another factor. We've seen in the last 5 years, since the lax enforcement, we've gone from about roughly 15,000 family units being interdicted at the border to 75,000. Okay, so this lax enforcement has been a magnet to draw them here. And increasingly, what has been discovered is that many adults who are crossing the border, especially adult males, men, the children that they have with them, the minors, are not their children. And so there has to be a way to verify that, and that was one of the conversations we had with the Attorney General of using DNA testing in the field to verify, because we're seeing this explosion of human trafficking across the border. So very complex issue, but I would say that the president, his administration, has struck the right balance this week.
It sounds like there are a lot of elements of implementation of this, Tony. Is there a sense that this can be done fairly quickly?
Well, it is complex and it's costly. We're already spending about $1 billion a year to care for the minors on the border. Now, restructuring to keep families together is going to be even more costly. The process, hopefully, Ted Cruz and some others, James Langford, some others have proposed increased funding to get the process by which these applications, in many cases asylum, that's kind of being abused. 80% of those filing for asylum after they're caught are being denied because they just don't meet the criteria. But that takes time. I mean, it's about a 45-day process. So it's not going to be easy, but the administration is committed to do it. And I will tell you that based on the track record I've seen of this administration, that President Trump, when he says he's going to do it, he gets it done.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Debbie Georgatos. I'm so grateful for President Trump. He kind of did take the images that were so bad in the media kind of got him out of people's heads a little bit because he did his executive order. But, moving forward, it seems like among the many things needed is better public education of the American electorate and, frankly, of people in Central and South America about what our asylum standards are, that poverty is not a standard, that is not a criteria that entitles you to asylum. And I think that the past 8 years, in fact, I read a statistic, there was a 1,700% increase in the number of asylum requests. And that's basically these moms and kids groups coming, if they are really moms and kids, coming to America. There just has been a sense America lets everyone in. And I think that's got to be corrected publicly.
Yes, there's certainly an educational component there, but there also we've got to have recognition of a really kind of a societal meltdown we're seeing in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, where violence is just running rampant, and so there's a foreign policy component here that we've got to weigh in with these countries, these neighbors of ours to the south, that we've got to help them get their business in order. And this is one of the areas where Attorney General Jeff Sessions, I think, has done a remarkable job and has gotten almost zero credit. And that is going after the gangs, the MS-13 and these other violent gangs. I mean, he's been cracking down on them. And that's one of the reasons that you see a lot of these people fleeing these countries in Central America is because of the gang violence, the drug activity. And so they're looking for a safe place. I don't really blame them wanting to come to America. I'm glad people still want to come here, but it's got to be orderly. We've got to have laws in place, and we've got to enforce those laws. And one thing, Debbie, I think this has brought, I hope, a greater focus upon is that we truly do need to reform our entire immigration system, our laws. And I'm hoping that by the president taking these steps to address this one crisis point, that it doesn't alleviate the pressure for Congress to do their job.
Tony, this is Lathan Watts from First Liberty, and thanks for being on. I just wanted to kind of dovetail on that last point that you made. The president's executive order also said very specifically that he would direct DHS to keep them together to the extent permitted by law. And that last point you made about an overall reform of the legal immigration system and its process, not just this specific point of what we're dealing with, but I think one of the things that is good about the president's executive orders, it does sort of point back to Congress to fix the law, which is where the law is supposed to be fixed. And I don't know if this was his intent or not, but one way you pressure Congress to fix a law, if a law in the books is poorly worded or is not working out well, is you enforce it to the letter. And when people see a bad law enforced, they see the result, and now all of a sudden there's a little more pressure on Congress to fix it.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And Attorney General Sessions, I met with him on Monday discussing this. I mean, his intent of enforcing a law was just that, to enforce the law. I mean, that's his job. It's Congress to adjust the law if they want to adjust the law. But the lax enforcement is what has led to this crisis on our border, because essentially under the Obama administration, with the unaccompanied minors that began back in 2012, and then the decision to simply address family units through the civil process and basically give them a court date and let them go, and they didn't show back up, surprise, surprise. It's made this unsustainable. Unfortunately, we saw yesterday Congress took a pass, failed to pass the first Goodlatte bill by 20 votes, and it actually was the better of the two bills. So this is an issue that's been really nagging for a solution for the last 20 years, and it's not getting any better. There's just not much more road to kick this can down until we have to address it.
Absolutely. Tony Perkins is our guest, and we are going to take a break. After the break, we will take your calls, 800-351-1212, if you've got a question or comment, especially about the president's executive order. I'm also going to ask Tony if he thinks this executive order will successfully, at least over maybe the next weeks, sort of change the optics of the situation, which were bad. And also about the United Nations pulling us out of the Human Rights Council. We'll do all of that right after this. This month is the third anniversary of the 2015 Supreme Court decision, Obergefell versus Hodges. The decision brought us same-sex marriage across the land because it struck down all state laws that specified that marriage is the union between one man and one woman. When a court hands down a sweeping ruling that changes something you have known to be true about the world, it's well worth studying the dissenting opinion. Chief Justice Roberts, for the first time in his tenure, read his from the bench. He said, in part, "If you are among the many Americans of whatever sexual orientation who favor expanding same-sex marriage, by all means celebrate today's decision. Celebrate the achievement of a desired goal. Celebrate the opportunity for a new expression of commitment to a partner. Celebrate the availability of new benefits, but do not celebrate the Constitution. It had nothing to do with it." Some people said the ruling was a bellwether. It showed us where we are as a nation. It's true that some states had already opened marriage to same-sex couples. However, most had not. In fact, they'd amended their constitutions to say that marriage is what it has been for millennia. The Supreme Court ruling changed that, and in doing so, it changed what we can now count on as being true. I interviewed Justice Glenn Murdoch, recently retired from the Alabama Supreme Court. He says that post-Obergefell, we have entered what is really a new cosmology. The Supreme Court, he says, has recognized this new individual truth and dignity-based set of rights, not grounded in the integrated biblical paradigm of objective truth and rights understood by our framers. The marriage decision did include language about the right to live according to the man-woman definition of marriage. All 9 justices affirmed that religious liberty should be protected. Will it? With this post-Obergefell orthodoxy, we still don't know. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to the weekend edition of Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, Debbie Georgatos, and also Lathan Watts in studio in the round table with me. Tony Perkins, president of Family Research Council, is on the line with us. And Tony, I do want to say, because I haven't gotten to congratulate you for your appointment to the Religious Liberty Commission by President Trump. I know that I think you're one of the perfect people, and we've got several of our friends appointed to this commission, and congratulations.
Well, thank you, Penn. I'm excited about this, especially given it's the 20th anniversary of the Frank Wolf Wall that actually created the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And for the first time, we actually have an administration that is fully committed to religious liberty. In fact, Secretary of State holding the first ever ministerial meeting with foreign leaders next month to discuss solely religious liberty. This is an exciting time to be advocating for religious freedom around the globe. I think we're going to see a lot of things happen. And again, this is where we give this administration credit for following through on their commitments.
Yeah, well, one of the actions that was taken that I think relates to religious liberty in many senses is the fact that we pulled out of the Human Rights Council. And, of course, we took ourselves out of the company of some real bad actors, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, this has been described. I mean, this is like the fox, not just guarding the hen house, but the fox raiding the hen house. Some of these countries that were on the council, I mean, they're some of the worst abusers, and it's become a joke. And so, the administration's given them 17 months notice that they're pulling out, withdrawing funding for it as well. And so, maybe the other actors will, the other legitimate actors will put pressure to kind of clean this up because, basically this council has been used just to bash Israel. The vast majority of the resolutions have been to denounce Israel with all of the other bad actors in the world. That's who they've been focused on. And finally, the United States has enough's enough.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to go back to the immigration issue and just ask you, I mean, the optics were bad. And, the media took full advantage of it, as did the left, to amplify the issue of the separation of children and parents. But as you said, the president and his administration were obeying the law to the letter of the law in what was happening. So do you think now with this executive order, and hopefully Congress acts, that that damage can be mitigated?
Well, actually, I think that as the facts come out, the American people will realize the administration was doing the right thing. Now, you say the optics. I mean, look, for someone not to be touched by the separation of children from their parents, I mean, they have to be a tin man. They'd have to have no heart. But here's, and I've made this point on my program earlier in the week as a former police officer. It's not unlike what happens here domestically in the United States. If I arrested a parent, a single parent, or two parents, and they had children in the home, I didn't take those children to prison with the parents or to jail. I had to call child protection, and they took the kids into custody and tried to find a relative if they could. If not, they would put them in a foster care. It's not unlike what's happening at the border. We've gone to great expense in many cases to identify if they're, especially for the unaccompanied minors, to place them with family in this country. So, look, the pictures are heart-wrenching, and the reality is it is bad. But you can't put this blame all on the administration for enforcing the law. Again, the parents made the decision in many cases to put these children at great risk to bring them across the border. Our laws not being enforced, again, became like a magnet for people coming here. Look, the polling out, a Rasmussen poll just out, I think, last night, it was a majority, 54% or so of Americans said, you know what, it's the parents that bear the bulk of the responsibility for bringing these kids. We're doing a compassionate thing. I think as people see the president is a compassionate person, and you can uphold the law and be compassionate at the same time. I think we can stem the tide, reduce the risk that these children are facing by coming across the border. We can clamp down on human trafficking that's been exploited because of these loopholes. And I think in the end, the president, not from the media, because the media actually has been manufacturing a lot of this. We're seeing pictures circulated from 2014 that were responsible, the Obama administration responsible. Now the Time magazine having to apologize for their cover story, their cover picture, that in fact it was not a child separated from their parents that they've tried to portray as. So the media, I think, is also, as all the hysteria begins to die down, I think the American people are seeing through it and realize that this was just a way that the president could be attacked.
I couldn't agree more. This is Debbie. And, the other thing is interesting. I agree with you that I think many people in the public, when they first saw the story, they thought, gee, that sounds terrible. What is wrong here? But you realize you're getting manipulated by the media, and there's kind of this perpetual outrage factory coming from the American left. And I don't think, and people are just kind of tired of it. And they want solutions, and they want firm policy. They want rule of law at the border. They don't want the chaos there has been. And the other great thing I thought about President Trump's remarks related to his executive order was he said, we're not changing the zero tolerance policy. We have had, now my words, we've had lawlessness for a while. We're now going to say it actually is a violation of our law to come in our country, to sneak in without permission, and we're going to hang on to zero tolerance, at the same time do a better job expediting the decisions in these cases related to asylum and keeping the families together. So I thought it was a good mix of, I think you started saying, compassion and the rule of law.
Yeah, and you can do both. And in fact, you have, and I take issue with some of the evangelicals that I think distort Scripture here about caring for the stranger, the alien. The way we care for people is that we provide an ordered society, and the way we do that is by the rule of law. The Scripture is very clear. Those that would sojourn with us, there's to be one law for them and for us. And they have to agree to the laws and the customs of the host. And so I'm all for legal immigration for people coming to this country. And one of the good things about this, another good thing, is that America is a compassionate country, and I think it was seen in this because people were just horrified by families being torn apart. And I hope we can, look at that from a standpoint of what some of our policies are doing domestically, as that we're fragmenting the American family. And while it might not be as dramatic as separating people at the border, when we see the fragmentation of our culture today, in essence, what is happening, children are being separated from their parents and families are being broken. And I think there's an understanding that we saw in this episode that people understand that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Tony, thank you so much. I mean, that makes me think about the way even some of our policies move toward not allowing a child to have a mother and a father from the very beginning. So, we do need to be consistent. And I thank you for the way you do fight for consistent policy and what you're doing there in Washington, D.C. and across the country. And thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks, Penna. Great to be with you. You all have a great weekend.
You too. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Perkins, Family Research Council, and it was fun to talk with him. He's a national treasure. I appreciate many of the efforts of FRC, and they're just really a great organization. He's leading it well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, next up, we're going to talk about something that's happened in Canada in their courts, which is something we have to look toward that possibility and preventing it in this country. It has to do with religious liberty. We'll do that after this.
Ronnie fixes cars in a shop on his property. That allows him to earn a living for his family and be home to help care for Michael. Ronnie and Judy adopted Michael more than 20 years ago, knowing he would never walk or be able to care for himself. But through listening to Point of View, they were convicted that every life God gives is precious. So even though Ronnie is now 69 and Judy can't lift Michael anymore, every day is a labor of love and a testimony to their faith. Providing for their family isn't easy, and yet every month for almost 15 years, they've invested in Point of View. Some listeners have changed their communities and the nation. Ronnie and Judy changed everything for Michael. Your gift to Point of View in June is an investment in changed lives, and a matching challenge provides double the impact if you give in the next few days. Please give now, 1-800-347-5151, or visit pointofview.net. Make a difference for the future. That future is now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I've recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you for sticking with us for Point of View. This is a story out of Canada, actually. Trinity Western University, which is a very prominent university there, has lost a years-long legal fight to launch what was going to be the only Christian law school in Canada. And Canada legalized same-sex marriage in 2005. At that time, there were promises that religious believers would be protected. But the graduates of this law school, in a sense, because of this ruling, it sounds like they will not be able to practice law or be licensed as attorneys. So that's pretty bad for this law school, I would think.
Definitely. And it's, frankly, I think really misplaced priorities by the accrediting body, because that's
who really started this.
That's really the issue, is whether or not the school is accredited. And any accrediting body is supposed to be evaluating the quality of the education that the students are receiving there. And I don't see how this issue really pertains at all to the legal education those students would have received. But it does point out what the priorities of the Canadian government are.
So the school has sort of a community covenant where they require their students to abide by certain rules of community. They're supposed to abstain from premarital sex, and they're supposed to live according to biblical principles in a sexual manner. And this decision really elevates the quote-unquote dignity or dignitary rights of LGBT people over Christians, even though it's a Christian law school. That's the absurdity of it. And in a sense, when I preface this by saying that they legalized same-sex marriage back in 2005, a long time ago, the legalization of same-sex marriage changes things in a country. And I think that's what worries me here, because we're now 3 years from Obergefell, and we can see already that it's changing things. But to that degree, in this country, I think would be devastating.
It sure would. You know, you might have thought I was playing with my phone over here, but I was actually trying to look up if Canada has a First Amendment right to freedom of religion. They actually have freedom of religion, because in America, a case like this should take into consideration our First Amendment guarantee of freedom of religion. And so that would weigh more heavily in a court's decision, you would hope. But in Canada, they actually say freedom of religion in Canada is a constitutionally protected right, allowing believers the freedom to assemble and worship without limitation or interference, which is a limiting qualifier, that your freedom of religion relates to your freedom to basically attend church, assemble and worship without limitation or interference. But yeah, the court is really, in this case, elevating the again, as the LGBT agenda, the spreading of the elevating of the right of LGBT activists to feel comfortable with, to not be offended by policies, over the right of a school to try to openly and honestly preface its institution on biblical standards and say that's just who we are from the start. But you know what's really odd? If Canada has freedom of marriage for same-sex couples, then how are they hurt by this? I mean, did this marriage thing say traditional marriage only? I mean, and how are they hurt by can't have sex outside of marriage if they're allowed to be married?
Well, I doubt that the school itself recognizes
same-sex marriage. That's very true.
But the interesting part about this, I think, is that this would have been the only law school that, the only private law school in Canada and the only one to offer a specialty in charity law. And it's really the only Christian law school. So, why can't they just have their Christian law school? How many LGBT people would really want to even go to a Christian law school? But yet, this law school is being destroyed because of that demand.
Right, and we've talked about this before, that there has to be a way for peaceful coexistence when it comes to this issue and others. I think it's interesting. The opinion said that the public interest of the law profession includes promoting equality by ensuring equal access, supporting diversity within the bar, and preventing harm to LGBT students. Well, they obviously aren't concerned with intellectual diversity. Otherwise, they would accredit this university and say these
viewpoint diversity. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the point that Debbie brought up about their First Amendment is a big one, and to the extent that it protects the freedom to worship, that you can assemble in your church and you can believe what you want and you can worship God how you see fit. When you walk out that door after Sunday, you got to fall in line with what the government says, and that is being argued in the U.S. right now. You will hear people who argue against religious liberty in various arenas. They will make this exact argument, and they will use terms like right to worship and the freedom to worship, and they will say things like freedom of exercise protects your right to believe, not your right to act. And that's how they come after people like Jack Phillips, people like our clients, the Kleins in Oregon. So if you want to take a look at your future, you can look north to Canada.
It is really an astonishing decision in a, Western civilization country that otherwise probably does pride itself on diversity of ethnicity and race and openness to various values and beliefs and wanting to include all these kind of buzzwords of the left, inclusiveness and diversity. They really are known for that. They try to be known for that. But it really, again, it gets back to we have subconsciously, or maybe even maybe we are more conscious of it, but over the last decades, begun to have a societal consensus that a lot of diversity is a great thing, but this Christian stuff, this serious, earnest Christian practice stuff, that's a little bit edgy. That doesn't really belong in our marketplace and diversity of ideas. It's a little too extreme. And the other thing that continually occurs is that Christians are painted as the ones who are intolerant. It is why is the way the LGBT community argues about marriage is that Christians are intolerant of them, but they are indeed actually the ones trying to trying to sell the argument that Christianity is intolerant and should therefore not be honored in our cultural discussions, in our laws, in our court decisions.
I remember back to the Obergefell decision, and that there was a section in there written by. The opinion was written by Anthony Kennedy about religious liberty, and actually could have actually been drawn from the brief that First Liberty Institute filed, because there was a lot of encouragement to the court to remember religious liberty, and so this was in the opinion. So you could be very hopeful that religious liberty would be respected, even by the other side. Okay, we've got gay marriage now. Let's be happy with it. Let's tolerate the other point of view, like we were asking for tolerance. But no. I mean, we already had some cases in the pipeline, but it just was amazing right after the decision, the number of demands that the Christian view not even be allowed or tolerated, or, especially coming on businesses. And then the transgender privacy issue raised its ugly head very, very quickly after the Obergefell decision. That's why I say that same-sex marriage really changed everything in one sense. And so, we've got our work cut out for us, I think, in protecting religious liberty, even more after that Obergefell decision 3 years ago. Well, we'll take your calls after the break, 800-351-1212.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
What is the American creed? That is a question David Glertner asks in his book, America Light. He has been on my radio program to talk about his book and his op-ed that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. He is a fascinating individual. He received 2 degrees in classical Hebrew literature, but then became a professor of computer science at Yale University. Some have called him a rock star in the world of computing. You might remember that he was one of the people who was critically injured when he opened a mail bomb sent by the Unabomber. He believes that we need to return to the principles that made this country great. Unfortunately, he says, many of us don't know what they are or think they can't work. He blames the public schools and the academy for this failure to pass on the basic ideals that have served America so well for centuries. He laments that almost no one believes that our public schools are doing a passable job of teaching American and Western civilization. Textbooks and class lectures in our education system today often start with the assumption that America and Western ideals are bad for civilization. He concludes that many American children have never heard a good word for the United States, the West, Judaism, or Christianity their whole lives. He also laments that our American culture is in the hands of intellectuals, which he says are usually people born with high IQ and low common sense. He gives lots of examples of this. You can probably think of many other examples of people who are very bright but lacking in basic common sense. America's creed is quite simple: freedom, equality, democracy, and America as the promised land. The early founders believed in America as a city on a hill, as did many presidents right up to President Reagan. It is time to use our American creed to evaluate those who are teaching our kids and those who are leading our nation. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We are taking your calls here at Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, Debbie Georgatos, and also Lathan Watts are in studio with me. And we did promise, and I'm going to keep the promise. Let's go to California and speak with Raymond, listening in on KYCC. Hi, Raymond. Thanks for calling.
Hi, Penna. Hi, folks. Nice to see you. It's nice to be with you. The reason that I was calling is back in early 80s, 1981 and 2, I was in the military. I was stationed in Berlin, and I had the fortunate responsibility of conducting the Berlin orientation tour. And we would bring families from West Germany to Berlin, and often we would visit the East. And I had to read a number of scripts to these people so that they followed laws that were in effect in East Germany. And one of them was, when we stop for lunch, please do not pray over your food. And Lathan just now mentioned something about being in church and saying what you wanted to say in church, but leaving church and falling under a different set of rules. During my time in Berlin, I was blessed to get to see Reverend Billy Graham in East Berlin. And he said basically the same thing. Here in the church, we can say what we want. But if you take your confession outside the church, in your public, you're likely to be arrested. And it just sounded so similar to me. I thought, what, are we moving backward in time? I don't understand how our laws have gotten to a point where we have to be so careful about where we are to share our faith.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like we're moving backwards. I think really, just like we live in a world that's affected by sin, and we're always degrading just the human body is, and I think we always move to the left. We always political systems always move to the left, and which is a bad direction for it to go in.
Which is why freedom lovers who understand the Constitution and the importance of the idea of the Declaration of Independence, you have rights from God simply because you're born. It's the job of government to protect them. Liberty lovers in every generation have to speak up, because I agree the trend is to the left. And Raymond, I like your point about analogizing what was occurring in East Germany. Part of the reason that is occurring in Western civilization now, in America especially, we've elevated the idea that if you're offended, that's the highest and most egregious standard that must be honored, is you can't offend people. So I might be offended by, as a conservative, by, radical environmentalists who want to take away cars, or a radical, all sorts of radical things. But if you're on the left and you're offended, then all of society is supposed to back down and be quiet so you're not offended. That's what this religion thing is, in part.
The interesting thing too, Penna, is that Jesus already saw this happening. Remember, he's the one who told us to turn the other cheek. And I guess it's just the Christian's lot in life. I'm a conservative. I'm a Christian, evangelical, Pentecostal. But it's our lot, I think, in life to be that person who is subjugated somehow. I don't know. I think it's just. I'm glad that the word is available, and we kind of saw this coming, or we should have seen this coming at some point.
Yeah, in a sense, we have built a country on the idea that you would have religious tolerance for different faiths. So in a sense, yes, that's part of our mandate, our DNA. But I also think we have to fight. There has to be a positive. You have to always, as Debbie said, you have to always be working to protect that liberty, not only for Christians, but for everyone. That's what you're about, isn't it, Lathan?
That's exactly right. We defend Americans of all faiths, and our mission is to protect and restore religious freedom for all Americans. And to Raymond's point, and to your point about drifting to the left, that is the definition of American exceptionalism. It is not the exceptional in the way that people use that term, like, oh, that's really good. Like President Obama said he believed in American exceptionalism the same way Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. Yeah. No, American exceptionalism is we literally are the exception to world history. If you look at world history and the way human beings have related to one another and in governmental structure, it has the long history of the strong oppress the weak. And then you have this little nation that comes along, and a unique moment in history where we get a chance, people actually have a chance to choose how they're going to be governed. And they create this Republican form of government that protects your rights. And it says in our founding documents, like Debbie said, that is the purpose of government, is to protect those God-given rights. And that's why we have a First Amendment, and that's why the first one, that's why we're called First Liberty. The first one is about protecting your religious liberty, because every totalitarian regime in the history of the world, when it comes into power, has to eliminate religious liberty, because it cannot stand and it cannot withstand a people who have an allegiance to something higher than the government. That is why we do what we do. Because, Amen. And I think, as a person of faith, we have a responsibility as stewards of the blessings that we're given. And it is one of the greatest blessings any people have ever been given, which is to live in a free country. And there are no permanent victories. There are no permanent losses. There are only permanent battles. And we lose.
Always a struggle.
Exactly. We lose when we stop fighting. And before I forget, I'll thank you for your service and what you have given to the country. And I spent some time in Berlin and stood where Checkpoint Charlie used to be.
Oh, wow.
And there's a great museum there now that shows you the lengths to which people went to escape East Germany into the West. And they did that for a reason. And
it's interesting that you mention that, because I was a journalist there. I worked for the Berlin Observer newspaper, the command information newspaper there. And I got an opportunity to interview a guy who was one of those escapees, who worked at the U.S. Army Gymnasium as an equipment person. And so I agree I understand completely what you're saying. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I'm going to take the rest of your comments off the air. God bless, huh?
Thank you, Raymond. We appreciate your call. And, when you look at our government, if we have leftists in charge, then they are completely threatened by religious people, religious liberty. People who believe in something besides government are going to be a threat to government. And so that's why we had to turn so many things around with regard to the Obama administration and what they did and how they attacked religious liberty in so many ways. And very quickly, this administration has populated itself with people who believe in protecting religious liberty, even in the departments like Health and Human Services and others. And now, in the State Department, you've got this commission. Tony Perkins is part of it. It's a constant battle. It really is.
It is a constant battle. And, you have to feel called to, as a Christian, if you want to preserve the extraordinary, exceptional nature of liberty in America, you're not doing it just for now. You're doing it for the generations and your grandchildren's grandchildren. It's a long-term battle, because there is just a tendency, you talk about trending toward the left. It's just a tendency of some people to want to control others, and especially leftists to control people. You have to be able to shape and mold and form their thoughts. And if their thoughts are molded and shaped by their faith and what they understand to be the ultimate truth, the government can't control those people. And that's what makes people of leftist determination to control people so frustrated with Christianity or any deep faith, that you just can't be shaped by the government, and they can't have that. This is why communists come to power and they kill all the priests and the pastors. They root out the church and people who might plant ideas in people's heads like your right to liberty.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's not really another radio program that's broadcast across the nation that discusses these issues, I think, in this depth. And that's why I just right now want to point you to our Point of View website, because, number one, we back our discussions up with things you can read or pass out. And so we've got articles like, for instance, one from Christianity Today about the Canadian law school decision is there, and other pieces of information. We have a link to First Liberty Institute and a link to the two cases that we hope go to the U.S. Supreme Court, the protection of the Bladensburg Cross in Maryland, in the D.C. area, and also the protection of Coach Kennedy's right to pray after a football game, just a personal prayer. So you can go and learn more about that to pointofview.net. And, really it's a responsibility of all of us to be involved in protecting our liberties. And one way you can do it is by supporting organizations like First Liberty Institute and supporting Point of View, because we broadcast this information. So, again, at pointofview.net, there's that opportunity for you to donate, and I really urge you to do so. It's actually coming up on the fiscal year end for both of our organizations, so this would be a great time to help us meet our goals. And we do continue to take your calls, though, here at Point of View. 800-351-1212. We'll be back after this.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blythe had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
As we talk about the threats to religious liberty, it's a perfect opportunity to bring forward some of the developments in cases that you who listen to this program often hear about and have been following. And sometimes it seems like it takes forever for the resolution going through the court system. But with a couple of these cases, we're sort of at a pivotal moment. And one of them, of course, is the Coach Kennedy prayer case out in the state of Washington. And in other segments, I've showed this, but I want to show the present that Lathan Watts brought to me today here at Point of View. This is I guess that's the best way. It's show and tell. This is the new T-shirt coming out from First Liberty. That's Coach Kennedy. He was a Marine, and now he's fighting for religious liberty. May go all the way to the Supreme Court, right, Lathan?
Well, we will know soon. We'll be filing Coach's cert petition next week, and then we'll play the waiting game like we always do and see what the court decides whether or not to take his case. But
so when do you find out if they'll take the case? When does that happen?
It's a long process.
Next year?
No, I think we will know before then. But they list the cases that they're going to discuss, called the cases that will be conferenced. And
okay.
So then they discuss those cases. You have to have at least 4 justices vote to take the case in order for them to grant the writ of certiorari, or cert, and we call it for short. So as long as it is on that list of cases that are being conferenced, or they keep rescheduling it or relisting it, as long as we don't see it on the cert denied list, there is hope. We have cases right now that we're still waiting to hear if they're going to take, that have been rescheduled and relisted 12, 13, 14 times. That we will hopefully find out by the end of this term if they've decided to take those. But as far as Coach Kennedy goes, we're going to file his petition next week, as well as our client, the American Legion, on behalf of the Bladensburg World War I Memorial.
Okay, well, the Coach Kennedy case, I think it has a lot of cachet in a sense because President Trump talked about it during the campaign when he was talking about the protection of religious liberty. If somebody has not been listening to our show, not been following First Liberty Institute and your website, which I encourage people to do, could you just explain the case?
Sure. Coach Kennedy was the head coach of the junior varsity football team and an assistant on the varsity team at Bremerton, Washington. And Coach had sort of a rough childhood, then spent 20 years in the Marine Corps. He got out of the Marines and wanted to help kids, and he chose coaching to do that. And before he even took the job, the way he tells his story is he had made a commitment to God that if he was given the opportunity to coach these kids and to help them, and that he would thank God after each game for the opportunity to do that. And he did for close to 7 years. After each game, he would go to the 50-yard line. He would take a knee for about 15 to 30 seconds, say a silent prayer, thanking God for the opportunity to coach, for the effort his kids made, for the safety of the players, for the sportsmanship. And even in the Seattle, Washington area, which if you know anything about that area, is not exactly a hotbed of religious activity. I mean, it's
not a red state.
Not the Bible Belt.
Exactly. It is one of the more unchurched areas in America. Even up there, no one ever complained about what Coach was doing. In fact, the administration at the school, the way they found out about what he was doing was someone complimented what he was doing to the school. And once they found out, they told him he had to stop. Coach's commitment was to a higher authority, and he did what he had to do. And the school district suspended him initially, and then refused to renew his contract. So he lost his job as a coach for taking a 15 to 30 second silent prayer, taking a knee after the football game. We represent Coach, and we represent him at a trial court level, trying to get his job back initially, and had to go to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, not known as the most conservative circuit, actually known as the most liberal circuit, the most overturned circuit. But the Ninth Circuit in hearing Coach's case said that in their opinion said that any public school employee who was engaged in some sort of religious activity, if he could be seen by the general public, has violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, that they would be assumed to be speaking on behalf of the government, and therefore violating the First Amendment. The Establishment Clause, of course, we argued that this is his free exercise, the rest of the First Amendment, that he's not speaking on behalf of the school district. The Ninth Circuit ruled against us, so we are filing his appeal to the Supreme Court next week.
Do you think that it being the Ninth Circuit might influence the court to take it, since very often they're overturned by the Supreme Court often?
I mean, it's hard to know what goes through those 9 people's minds when they get in a room and discuss a case, and what influences them. If we knew that, we would bottle it probably, and we would have a great success rate at getting cases in front of the Supreme Court. So I don't know if that will be a factor. I hope that the facts of the case and the implications of such a bad decision by the Ninth Circuit, I hope that's enough for the Supreme Court to take the case and reverse it, because this would not just affect Coach Kennedy. It would affect any person of any faith employed by the government, or that would be a Catholic employee making the sign of the cross over a meal. If they're seen doing that, by this opinion, they violated the First Amendment. A Jewish employee wearing a yarmulke. Wow. You name it. It's the implications are vast, and so hopefully that's enough for the court to take it.
You know, the case we were talking about earlier, we touched on briefly, the Masterpiece Cake Shop, with the Supreme Court just decided, and that was really a freedom of expression. The First Amendment, Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise. I don't have it in front of me. Respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise. So Masterpiece, about the baker who didn't want to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, was essentially he was saying this is interfering with my free exercise. This case, Coach Kennedy, is an Establishment Clause case. I just got thinking while you were talking about how, it's essentially saying that his conduct in signaling, I guess maybe it's both aspects of the First Amendment, but his conduct of signaling faith as a public employee constituting an establishment of religion, it just means it is such the free exercise part matters too, but the Establishment Clause seems like that should be very appealing for the court to want to define, to clarify, to say, not every expression by a public employee establishes religion. When you really force yourself to think about what the First Amendment was trying to say, it's like, it wasn't trying to, it was about saying we're not going to have the state of Connecticut announce that we're all going to be Episcopalian. I mean, it was about, we're not establishing religion. We're not having that form of tying, but to have extended the Establishment Clause, thinking to the point that someone who works for a public entity can't pray without seeing a violation of the Establishment Clause, I think that would appeal to the justices to want to say that's just too extreme.
I hope so, and the Supreme Court justices and opinions and appellate court judges and constitutional law professors, they all love balancing tests, right? If you read these, and if you read their opinions, and I think the point that you're raising is that the two clauses of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, especially in the last probably 20, 30, 40 years, have gotten out of balance to the point that we are seeing things as an Establishment Clause matter when maybe we should be viewing them as a free exercise matter. And so cases like Coach Kennedy's present the court with an opportunity to sort of restore a balance between those two parts of the First Amendment, because that's really what is the essential issue with Coach Kennedy is he doing this as a private citizen, or is he doing this speaking for the government? And I don't think anybody sitting up there in the crowd who might have watched Coach as they were walking out of the bleachers, I don't think anybody saw that and immediately made the assumption, oh, well, I can see the ISD has established Christianity as the official religion.
No one hears what he says, number one. He's not even praying out loud over a loudspeaker. There have been cases about microphones and it's owned by the government. There's none of that.
Right. Yeah. This was a as I said, 15 to 30-second silent prayer, just between he and his God.
And to harp back to my left-wing thinking point of view about all this, that faith that he is showing by just silent prayer, thanking God, irritates the daylights out of people who don't want to, who are not just atheistic, but irritated by and annoyed by, frustrated by the idea that their fellow Americans actually have faith in something. There's an element of just irritation just because you're expressing faith.
Okay, after the break, we're going to banty about one more question about schools. Should a teacher have to call a quote-unquote transgender student by their preferred pronoun? We'll talk about it after this. This month is the third anniversary of the 2015 Supreme Court decision, Obergefell versus Hodges. The decision brought us same-sex marriage across the land because it struck down all state laws that specified that marriage is the union between one man and one woman. When a court hands down a sweeping ruling that changes something you have known to be true about the world, it's well worth studying the dissenting opinion. Chief Justice Roberts, for the first time in his tenure, read his from the bench. He said, in part, "If you are among the many Americans of whatever sexual orientation who favor expanding same-sex marriage, by all means celebrate today's decision. Celebrate the achievement of a desired goal. Celebrate the opportunity for a new expression of commitment to a partner. Celebrate the availability of new benefits, but do not celebrate the Constitution. It had nothing to do with it." Some people said the ruling was a bellwether. It showed us where we are as a nation. It's true that some states had already opened marriage to same-sex couples. However, most had not. In fact, they'd amended their constitutions to say that marriage is what it has been for millennia. The Supreme Court ruling changed that, and in doing so, it changed what we can now count on as being true. I interviewed Justice Glenn Murdoch, recently retired from the Alabama Supreme Court. He says that post-Obergefell, we have entered what is really a new cosmology. The Supreme Court, he says, has recognized this new individual truth and dignity-based set of rights, not grounded in the integrated biblical paradigm of objective truth and rights understood by our framers. The marriage decision did include language about the right to live according to the man-woman definition of marriage. All 9 justices affirmed that religious liberty should be protected. Will it? With this post-Obergefell orthodoxy, we still don't know. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, thanks for sticking with us for Point of View. We are actually in the final segment, and we've enjoyed having you and all the discussions today. Debbie Georgatos, thanks for being in here today.
Thanks for having me.
And Lathan Watts, thank you, too. I want to let you talk about the Bladensburg cross. I think this is such an important case. It's a huge cross. It's in the D.C. area. Someone I know well used to live in Maryland, and he would drive past it on the way to work. And he loves Point of View. He listens all the time. He was blown away a few years ago when this case came up, the thought of it being torn down. It's terrible. Tell us about the case.
So the Bladensburg World War I Memorial has stood in Bladensburg, Maryland for almost 100 years. It memorializes 49 men from Prince George's County, Maryland, who died in World War I. It was initially a project of Gold Star moms, these men's mothers who wanted to honor their sons. The American Legion stepped in and helped sort of complete the memorial, which is American Legion is our client. And that's why if you go to our website, firstliberty.org, if you look at the images of the monument itself, you'll see the seal of the American Legion is in the center of the cross because the American Legion helped complete the monument. So the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals has determined that this monument violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment because it is in the shape of a cross and it sits on government property. It's in the shape of a cross for a reason. The mothers chose that shape because it resembled the actual headstones that their sons were buried under. Many of them buried in Europe initially at the end of the war. And at that time, that moment in time, those mothers had no expectation of ever being able to visit their sons' actual grave sites. So that's the reason that it's in the shape of the cross. And at that point in history, that shape was universally recognized as a symbol of sacrifice and a symbol related to World War I. So that's the reason it's in that shape. The reason that it's on government property, it was initially on property owned by the American Legion, our client, but the government took the property in eminent domain when it built a highway, a Veterans Memorial Highway. But they literally went out of their way to avoid disturbing this monument. If you see where it is in Bladensburg, you will see the roads actually veer around it. It's also part of a larger memorial park there in Bladensburg, where there are other memorials to World War II and Vietnam, the war on terrorism. So it is part of a larger.
Is it the only cross among all those?
That monument is the only one that is in the shape of a cross.
In the shape of a cross.
As I said, because
another reason that you've got a diverse set of monuments there.
Exactly, and when you know the history behind it and the reason that it was put in that shape, it makes total sense for it to be in the shape of a cross. Essentially, what the Fourth Circuit is ordering is that we deface a gravestone. Basically, they even discussed at oral argument when this case was in front of the Fourth Circuit. Well, maybe if we just chop the arms off the cross, then it can stay. Then it won't be offensive anymore. That's defacing the tombstone of people who died for this country, and that's why this case is so important. Not just because of this monument, because the Fourth Circuit covers Arlington National Cemetery. So if the Supreme Court doesn't take our case and overturn the Fourth Circuit, then this precedent could be used to take down other monuments even within Arlington National Cemetery. There's the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice, another World War I memorial to men who volunteered in the Canadian Army even before America was officially in World War I. Then you have the Argonne Cross of Sacrifice, the men who died in Argonne. And I hate to even think about it, but the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier says, "Here lies in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." So if the Supreme Court doesn't reverse the Fourth Circuit, you could use this precedent if you're the American Humanist Association, and I have no doubt that they would try to come in and say, well, that violates the First Amendment, so let's just sandblast the word God off the tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So we're filing our cert petition next week, and we are hopeful the court will take this case and reverse the Fourth Circuit.
Okay, big week.
In the Bladensburg case, I was going to ask you with respect to, because there have been other decisions that made it to the Supreme Court relating to religious monuments on public land. Do you have a sense that the four conservatives are probably on your side? And are any of the liberal justices, based on your past opinions they have issued or signed on to, are they maybe on your side? Or do you have any idea?
I don't know how we would sort of predict how the numbers would break down, but we're confident if they take the case that we will win. Just because it's sort of like the Fourth Circuit just didn't get the memo. As you said, the other cases have been decided on this issue. And we drew, when you go to a Circuit Court of Appeals, you get a 3-judge panel. Yeah. You don't sit in front of the entire court. And our 3-judge panel were 2 Obama appointees and a Clinton appointee.
So did they go to law school? No, just sorry.
And actually, I will say this. The Clinton appointee wrote a very, very good dissent. The decision against us was 2-1. And his dissent actually said, I'll paraphrase, but said, we forget what we don't see, and that the memory of these men is going to be forgotten if you take this down. and that's what memorials are for. So I'm confident if the court takes it that we will win, because history and the law and the Constitution are on our side.
Just logic and common sense. Yeah.
But that's the first thing they tell you to forget when you go to law school. You know that. I mean, they drill that out of you first year. Common sense and decency. Right. So, but we're cautiously optimistic if the court takes it that we will win.
I told you that we would discuss an Indiana high school teacher who actually had to resign because he violated the transgender policy of the school district. He did not want to call students who said they were the other sex from what they were born with. He didn't want to call them by the pronouns and the names that were actually
that they chose.
He didn't want to do that, and we're finding out all kinds of things about the case and the fact that parents in the district didn't even know about this policy. But we don't have time because we're near the end of the program. So I'm going to refer you to pointofview.net and let you read about it. And perhaps at another time we can discuss this. Maybe there'll be some new developments in that situation. But again, it's pointofview.net. While you're there, we would ask that you would check out the donate button. As I mentioned earlier, it is coming up on our fiscal year end. And this is the time when we make decisions for what we're going to do here at Point of View. And we do depend on you, the listener, to really keep us broadcasting. And we thank you. We thank you for being part of it. You can actually be part of our team. And really, you can't be behind these microphones because you live across the country, but you can help us by just asking God what he would have you do financially to help this ministry. So we would ask that you would do that. And, I just want to thank you, Debbie, for being with me today, being with us, and just tell everybody a little bit about what you do on Sunday nights.
Well, thank you. In addition to being a political analyst and just a substitute host when I get to be in Point of View, I host my radio show on Salem stations. It's called America Can We Talk, but you can watch it. We put it out on Facebook Live also. So if you're on Facebook, you can go to America Can We Talk and watch the show. It's Sunday evening, 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time. And you can also just go to americacanwetalk.org and click on Listen Live, and you can listen. So even if you're at your desk on Sunday evening, you can listen. So we're always, my mantra is we talk truth about America. I just talk about the great, extraordinary country that is America and all the issues facing our country we have to resolve in ways that will preserve our unique greatness.
Well, thank you for doing that so well with us today. And Lathan, I also thank you for your work at First Liberty Institute, an organization we love here at Point of View. And thanks for being with us today.
Always happy to be here.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, at pointofview.net, there is something to back up just about everything we've done today. Things you can read, things you can pass out. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Karen, for all the work you did today. Everybody have a great weekend.
Ronnie fixes cars in a shop on his property. That allows him to earn a living for his family and be home to help care for Michael. Ronnie and Judy adopted Michael more than 20 years ago, knowing he would never walk or be able to care for himself. But through listening to Point of View, they were convicted that every life God gives is precious. So even though Ronnie is now 69 and Judy can't lift Michael anymore, every day is a labor of love and a testimony to their faith. Providing for their family isn't easy, and yet every month for almost 15 years, they've invested in Point of View. Some listeners have changed their communities and the nation. Ronnie and Judy changed everything for Michael. Your gift to Point of View in June is an investment in changed lives, and a matching challenge provides double the impact if you give in the next few days. Please give now, 1-800-347-5151, or visit pointofview.net. Make a difference for the future. That future is now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.